Welcome to this deep dive into the life of Junko Tabei. She's a bit of a legend, a petite Japanese woman who conquered the world's tallest mountains. I mean, that in itself is pretty amazing. But when you consider the time period, we're talking the 1960s in Japan.
Yeah, definitely not the most, shall we say, progressive era for women stepping outside of traditional roles.
Right. So how did she end up not just climbing, but becoming a pioneer in a field dominated by men?
It's fascinating, actually. It all seems to have started with something so simple, like a small seed that grows into this massive tree.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this seed. What sparked her passion for climbing?
Well, the sources mention the school trip she took when she was just 10 years old. That's where she first experienced mountain climbing, and it seems like it just clicked for her.
Wow, 10 years old. It's amazing how these seemingly insignificant moments can sometimes shape an entire life. But I can only imagine that pursuing this passion, especially back then, couldn't have been easy.
Oh, absolutely not. Mountaineering, especially in that era, was seen as, well, a man's world. And societal pressures on women in Japan at that time, they were pretty intense.
Yeah, I can only imagine the pushback she must have faced. So tell me, what was it like for her to break into those male-dominated climbing clubs?
I mean, the sources don't get into specifics about, like, individual instances of prejudice, but you have to consider the context. Often, she was the only woman in these clubs.
Yeah, that speaks for itself, doesn't it? It must have taken incredible resilience to keep going in the face of that. Did she ever talk about the challenges she faced?
Not specifically in the sources we have, but I think it's safe to say that she had to develop some serious mental fortitude.
Yeah, to constantly prove herself, not just as a climber, but as someone who deserved to be there.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about brushing off dismissive comments. It was about mastering the technical skills, pushing her physical limits. Every climb was a chance to silence those doubts.
It makes her achievements even more impressive knowing the extra weight she was carrying on her shoulders. So how did she start to gain recognition in the climbing world?
By being really, really good. The sources mention she quickly made a name for herself with her skill and determination.
Like she was methodically building a foundation, showing everyone she was a force to be reckoned with.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about talent, it was about tenacity, too. She summited numerous peaks in Japan, including Mount Fuji. It was clear she was a serious climber.
Building her reputation, climb after climb.
Right. And then, of course, comes Everest.
1975, the Japanese Women's Everest expedition. I mean, even getting that off the ground must have been a monumental challenge.
Oh, absolutely. Securing funding for a group of women to climb Everest in the 70s? I mean, come on. The sources mentioned she faced ridicule, people telling her to just stay home and, focus on raising a family.
It's unbelievable, like the nerve of some people. But beyond the societal stuff, there were also financial hurdles, right?
Huge ones. They had to be incredibly resourceful. Some sources say they even made their own gear to cut costs. Imagine sewing your own sleeping bag before tackling Everest.
It's remarkable, isn't it? The lengths they had to go to just to get to the starting line. But of course, Everest itself is one of the most dangerous mountains in the world.
It is. Unforgiving. And they encountered some truly terrifying situations during the expedition.
The sources mention a particularly devastating avalanche. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, man. Junko and her team were buried under tons of snow. Tons. At an altitude of over 20,000 feet.
I can't even imagine. How did they survive that?
Well, sheer willpower, I guess. And teamwork. They dug themselves out, waited for a break in the weather, and then...
They gave up and went home. I mean, who could blame them?
Nope. After 2 days of rest, they continued their ascent. 2 days.
That's insane.
It really is. I mean, talk about resilience. They were driven by something bigger than just reaching the summit. It was about defying those expectations, proving what was possible.
And 12 days later, on May 16th, 1975.
Junko Tabei became the first woman to reach the summit of Mount Everest. A historic moment.
A moment that changed the world's perception of what women could achieve.
Absolutely. It was a victory not just for her, but for women everywhere. And it paved the way for countless others to follow in her footsteps. But what's really fascinating is that her journey didn't end there.
Hold on, we'll have to pause here for now. This is getting really good. Okay, so we left off with Junko standing on top of the world. What could possibly top that?
Well, get this. Everest was just the start for her.
Really?
Oh, yeah. She went on to become the first woman to complete the 7 summits.
Wait, you mean...
Yep, the highest peak on every single continent.
That's incredible.
It is. We're talking Africa, North America, South America.
Antarctica?
Antarctica, you got it. Europe, too, of course. It's like Everest was just this spark.
Ignited this passion to conquer every mountain.
It's more than just conquering, though, isn't it? Think about the variety, the different environments, the challenges she faced on each one.
Yeah, that's true. She wasn't just repeating the same climb over and over, always pushing herself to adapt. It's amazing. But I wonder, with all those accomplishments, how did it affect her personally? Did it change her?
Well, you might expect someone like that, achieving so much, to be, a little boastful.
Yeah, maybe let it go to her head a bit.
But the sources paint a totally different picture. She stayed incredibly humble. In fact, she actually downplayed her Everest climb.
Downplayed it. How do you downplay summiting Everest?
She said she preferred to be remembered as the 36th person to reach the summit, not the first woman.
It says a lot about her motivations, doesn't it? So what was it about climbing for her then, if it wasn't the fame or the recognition?
I think if you look at her life as a whole, there's a clear pattern. It was about pushing her limits, yeah, but also about this deep respect for the mountains. It wasn't just about conquering them. It was about connecting with nature.
And that connection led her to become a pretty vocal advocate for protecting the mountains too, right?
Exactly. She saw firsthand the impact climbers were having on Everest, the pollution, the damage, and it really bothered her. So she dedicated herself to educating other climbers and advocating for responsible climbing practices. Got a master's degree in mountain preservation.
It's like she was giving back to the mountains that had given her so much.
Yeah. And it wasn't all about Everest. She also led climbs for students who had been affected by the 2011 tsunami.
Really?
Yeah. Even in her later years, she was still climbing, still sharing her passion with others. She understood how powerful mountains could be, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, too.
So it sounds like her relationship with climbing evolved over time, from personal challenge to something much bigger.
It did. She passed away in 2016.
Oh, I didn't realize that. So what kind of a legacy did she leave behind? What should we learn from her story?
Well, I think
So it sounds like Junko Tabei's story, it's a call to action for all of us. But how do we actually apply her example to our own lives? It's easy to get kind of overwhelmed thinking about everything she accomplished.
it's true. Her achievements were pretty extraordinary. But I think the key takeaway here is that it all started with a single step. Remember that school trip, the one where she discovered her love for climbing? It wasn't like she set out to conquer Everest on day one, right?
So it's more about finding that thing, that passion, and then taking those first steps.
Exactly. And those mountains. They could be anything. They could be literal mountains, of course. But they could also be personal goals, creative projects, or even just like facing our own fears, whatever challenges us to grow.
And then I guess the key is to approach those mountains with the same kind of determination and resilience that Junko had.
Exactly. Break those big goals down into smaller steps. Focus on the process, learn from the setbacks, and just never lose sight of that summit, even when things get tough.
Well, she definitely faced her fair share of setbacks, that's for sure. The sources really highlighted how she never let anything stop her, whether it was societal expectations, financial limitations, even that avalanche.
Yeah, and think about it. Setbacks are inevitable for all of us. It's how we respond to them that really defines our journey.
Well, a lot of it comes down to mindset then, believing in yourself and an ability to overcome challenges.
Absolutely. Junko's story shows us that we're often capable of much more than we think. It's about finding that inner strength, refusing to accept those limitations, pushing past our comfort zones.
Like she was saying, don't let anyone tell you what you can and can't do, not even yourself.
That's a pretty powerful message for all of us, no matter what mountains we're facing in our own lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Junko Tabei's life, any final thoughts for our listeners?
I think her life is a testament to the power of the human spirit. We all have that capacity for greatness inside us. It's about finding our own mountains, embracing those challenges, and never ever giving up on that climb.
And hey, maybe while we're pursuing our own summits, we might even inspire others to join us.
Absolutely. Just like Junko Tabei's legacy continues to inspire so many people all around the world. Her story shows us that even the most impossible dreams, they can be achieved with passion, perseverance, and that refusal to accept limitations.
Well, that is truly inspiring. Thank you for sharing your insights with us today and guiding us through this deep dive into Junko Tabei's life.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listener, we hope this exploration has given you a sense of possibility, a sense that you too can reach your own summits. Remember, the journey is just as important as the destination. So keep climbing, keep exploring, and keep pushing your limits. Until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep questioning, and keep striving for greatness.